Hi guys, Mimi G here. Today I'm going to be doing a sew along for the new Mccall pattern 8285. I love this dress. Let's get started. All right guys, so we're working with Mccall's 8285. I'm going to be doing view B, which is the shorter version. Now if you want to do the longer version, the only difference is that you're going to add a second tier. So however we attach this tier, you're going to do the very same thing and add the second tier if you so choose. But again, I'm going to be doing view B, and I can tell you already I'm going to wear this dress all spring and summer. And probably make it in different fabrics because it's really, really cute. On the back of the envelope, you have, as usual, a list of suggested fabrics and any notions that you're going to need. You're going to need, obviously, some elastic and some buttons for this dress. And then you have your fabric yardage requirements based on what pattern size you choose to cut. So we're going to be using pattern piece number 9. This is our collar. You're going to cut 2 on the fold of fabric and 1 of interfacing. You're going to cut pattern piece number 6. This is our collar band, and you're going to cut 2 of fabric on the fold and 1 on the fold of interfacing. Pattern piece number 5 is our front band, and you're going to cut 4 and then cut 2 of interfacing. Pattern piece number 8 is our elastic guide. You're going to cut 2. You're going to cut pattern piece number 4. This is our yoke back, and you're going to cut 1 on the fold. Pattern piece number 3 is our yoke front, and you're going to cut 2. Pattern piece number 11 is our skirt back, and you're going to cut 1 on the fold. Pattern piece 10 is our skirt front, and you're going to cut 2. Pattern piece number 1 is our front, and you're going to cut 2. Pattern piece number 2 is our back, and you're cutting 1 on the fold. Now, pattern piece number 7 is our sleeve for view A and B. I'm doing view B. You're going to cut 2. Now that we have everything cut and interfaced, we can get sewing. All right, we're going to start with our front and our front yoke. Now, you should have 2 dots on the top of your front. You're going to go ahead and do 2 rows of gathering stitches. I've done that already. We're going to pull our gathering stitches until this piece fits onto our yoke. And then with right sides facing, make sure you align that notch. And then just go ahead and adjust your gathers. Okay, now we're going to stitch across using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. All right, we're going to back stitch at the beginning and at the end. All right, once you've sewn on your yoke, you're going to go ahead and serge or trim your seam allowance and then press your seam up towards your yoke. You're going to do both of your fronts the same exact way. Now we're going to go ahead and set this aside. I want you to grab your back and your back yoke. Now the same way that we did for our front yoke, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to gather between your notches. You're going to pull your threads until your yoke, your back yoke, fits onto your back, and then you're going to use 5/8 of an inch seam allowance to sew this in place, and again press your seam up towards your back yoke. You should have your back yoke now attached to your back and both your fronts. So we're going to go ahead and sew our shoulder seams and our side seams. So with right sides facing, place your front on top of your back. Match your shoulder notches and pin. Okay, now let's go ahead and pin the side seam while we're here. Okay, go ahead and pin your other side seam the same way. We're going to head to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch both our shoulders using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then we're going to stitch our side seams while we're at the machine. Again, starting from your hem, you're going to work your way up with 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, I'm going to start at my shoulders using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now go ahead and sew your side seams the same way. Start at your hem, work your way up. All right, we have our side seam sewn and our shoulder seams. I went ahead and pressed my seams. I'm going to set this aside. We're going to work on the skirt portion of our dress. So go ahead and grab your front and your back. So your back piece was cut on the fold. and then you should have 2 front pieces. So what I've done is I've already created my gathering stitches. Now in the instructions, they have you sew your side seams together first and then gather, but I like to do mine in sections. I just find it a whole lot easier to manage. So I went ahead and did my 2 rows of gathering stitches along the top of the back, and then I did the 2 rows of stitching along each front. Okay, so both of mine are now have the gathering stitches. So I'm going to go ahead and pin my side seams together, sew the side seams, and then I'll pull my gathers. So with right sides facing, I'm going to start on one side seam. You're going to place your front to back, right sides facing. Align your notch. And then again, right sides facing. My fabric looked exactly the same on both sides. Okay, now you're just gonna head to your sewing machine. You're just doing a straight stitch, starting at the bottom, working your way up using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, sew both of your side seams together. Now that we have the lower part of our dress stitched to the side seams, we're gonna go ahead and pull our gathers and make it fit onto our bodice. So I'm gonna turn my bodice this way, and I'm going to place right sides facing, of course, one front section. So I'm going to pin first at my notch, and then I'm going to pin my side seam. And if you guys have seen me gather, you guys know I do this in sections. Okay, so now I'm just going to pull my gathers until this portion of the bottom part of our dress fits onto the bodice. Okay, once I see that it fits, then I'm going to go ahead and tie off my threads. And now I can just adjust and evenly distribute my gathers. Okay, now that I have it pinned in place, I can go ahead and then move on to the back. And you're just going to pull, gather, and pin each section until the entire thing is pinned in place. Okay, now I have my entire lower part pinned, gathered and pinned onto the bodice. So now we're going to go ahead and stitch this together. We're just using one continuous stitch. Using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, we're going to backstitch at the beginning and backstitch at the end. Okay, the lower part is attached now to the bodice. I went ahead and pressed my seam up towards the bodice. Now I went ahead and just slipped this on so I could check the length of it. I wanted it a little shorter. I'm only 5'4", so I generally have to shorten my dresses and my skirts, and I did want it to be a tad bit more flirty. So I actually shortened mine by about an inch. So go ahead and put this on, just slip it over your body and see if you like where the hem is gonna land. The hem allowance for this is 5/8 of an inch. So what you're going to do is you're going to do a narrow hem. Now you could just serge it the way that I did and then turn up the 5/8 of an inch and stitch. That's up to you if you rather do that. So if you want a cleaner version, you could turn in and press a 1/4 inch and then turn up 3/8 of an inch and stitch to give you your 5/8. Or like I said, if you try this on and you want it to be a little shorter, you can always do a 1-inch hem. It really is just up to you where you want this dress to fall on your body. So go ahead and press your 1/4 inch and then again your 3/8 if you're going to do that, or your full 5/8 of an inch, and then we're going to stitch our hem in place before we attach our front bands. Okay, so I went ahead and turned in my 1/4 inch, and then I actually pressed up 5/8 of an inch because I wanted it just a tad bit shorter. This also means that my band is going to be longer, right, because I've shortened the dress itself. But when we get to that, I'll show you if you did shorten your dress, we're just going to shorten the band after we attach it, which is a really easy thing to do. So now we're going to go ahead and sew our hem. I'm going to go ahead and stitch on the right side of my fabric just because I'd like for my bobbin stitch to be on the bottom and not on the right side of my fabric. So let's head on over to the sewing machine and stitch our hem in place. Okay, so I mentioned that I stitch with the right side of my fabric facing up, so I just wanted to point something out. When you do this, you can sort of feel where your hem is after you've pressed it. And so I sort of use that as a guide, and I move my needle either left or right so that I could get close to that folded edge and make sure that I'm catching my hem and everything is even. Now you're going to start by back stitching. You're going to stitch your entire hem back stitch at the end. You're going to continue until you're completely done sewing your hem. Once your hem is stitched, go ahead and give it a final press. We're going to work on our front band, so I'm going to set my dress aside for a sec. So you're going to grab your interfaced band, and on the notch side, you have one side that has 2 notches on it. You're going to press 5/8 of an inch, and you're going to do this for both, and we're going to go ahead and trim this down to 3/8. Okay, you're going to grab your uninterfaced band. You're going to place them right sides facing. Now I will note that I have not yet trimmed the bottom of my band because I want to pin it in place first and just make sure that it's going to fit and to know exactly how much I need to remove. You could also just measure up however much you removed from your dress and trim it then. I'm going to go ahead and pin. Okay, so you should have a dot that you transferred from your pattern piece onto your fabric. So what we're going to do is we're going to stitch 5/8 of an inch seam allowance from the bottom all the way up. You're going to stop 5/8 of an inch from the top. You're going to stitch to your dot. We're going to pivot and stitch up. Okay, again, starting at the bottom, using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitch at the beginning, and then we're going to pivot 5/8 of an inch from the top. Okay, I've gotten to 5/8 of an inch from the edge, and where my dot is, I'm going to pivot. We're going to sew to our dot, back stitch, and now we're going to pivot again and keep sewing all the way up. Back stitch. You're going to sew your other band to your band facing the same way. Okay, so over here at the top where we pivoted and then pivoted back up to the very top, we're going to go ahead and clip to the dot, but don't clip through your stitching. And then I'm just going to trim that away. And now we're going to go ahead and trim the rest of the band down to 3/8 of an inch. Okay, now we're going to do some understitching because that's really important for your band to stay nice and flat and folded to the inside. So we're going to go ahead and press our seam allowance towards the interfaced side. Okay, so I want you to press this first. Make sure that the seam allowance is facing your interfaced part of the band, and then we're going to go ahead and understitch. All right, so my facing is pressed towards my interfaced side. We're going to go ahead and understitch about 1/8 of an inch away from that seam. You're going to try and go as far up as you can. Now go ahead and prep your other front band the same way. Okay, so once you have your band done, what you're going to do is, I've already done it, but let me show you again. I made sure that I clipped my corners. I went ahead and pushed my corner out and then gave it a good press. So the very top should look like this. Now I also went ahead and just made sure that I had enough length on my band. I measured what that length was, and then I went ahead and cut off the amount that I had cut off from the dress itself. Now the only thing left to do is once you have that in place, if you didn't trim your dress, then it fits perfectly. You're going to go ahead and turn this right side's facing, just the bottom, and you're going to sew across that hem allowance, okay? Then we're going to turn that right side out and attach our band to the dress. Okay, I'm going to turn the bottom right side out. I'm going to poke out my corner. Now we're going to go ahead and pin this to our dress. So with right sides facing, you're going to go ahead and start pinning. Make sure that you're leaving your interfaced part from getting pinned. We're just pinning. Okay, once you have it pinned, you're going to go ahead and sew starting at your hem, working all the way up using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, once you have pressed your band to the inside, we're going to go ahead and pin, and then we're going to be doing some edge stitching. So I want you to pin on the right side that you're catching the underside of the band. Okay, so now you're going to go ahead and edge stitch. So we're not stitching in the ditch, you're actually going to edge stitch all the way down. You're going to do that on both sides, and that'll catch the inside of our band. Okay, so I have my band pinned in place. I'm starting at my hem on one side, and I'm just going to edge stitch all the way up. You're going to continue all the way up. You're going to edge stitch your other one the same way. All right, we're going to work on our collar. So go ahead and make sure that you stay stitch your neck. I start in the center and stitch my stay stitching in one direction, then start back in the back, center back, and work my way in the other direction. Now go ahead and grab your collar pieces. You should have one interfaced and one that's not interfaced. You're going to place them right sides facing. Okay, so now we're going to head to the sewing machine. We're going to stitch down one short end across the top of our collar and then back down. Okay, I went ahead and trimmed my seam allowance, trimmed into my corners. We're going to go ahead and turn this right side out. Okay, now take this to your ironing table and give it a really good press. All right, so I grabbed both my collar band pieces. The non-interfaced collar band along the bottom, I folded and pressed 5/8 of an inch, and then I trimmed it to 3/8 of an inch. Now we're going to go ahead and place our collar onto our collar band, right sides facing. You have some notches, so make sure that you're aligning your notches. Okay, then you're going to grab your other collar band, the non-interfaced one, and with right sides facing, go ahead and align those notches again, and now just pin through all 3 layers. Okay, we're going to go to the sewing machine. We're going to stitch using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, remember to back stitch at the beginning and at the end. Now go ahead and trim your seam allowance. All right, I went ahead and turned my collar band to the right side and gave it a press. Now we're going to go ahead and pin it to our neck. You should have some dots that are on your collar band. Those align up to your shoulder seams. Okay, now making sure that we keep this part of our collar band free, we're going to go ahead and stitch our collar band down to our neck using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Back stitch at the beginning and at the end. Go ahead and press your seam allowance and then press it up towards your collar band. Okay, so I am just going to pin my collar in place. You're going to slip stitch this closed after. This could be the very last thing that you do before you do your buttonholes. I'm just going to put a couple of pins here to keep it in place While I move on, we're gonna go ahead and do our sleeves. Okay, you can set this aside and go ahead and grab both your sleeves. Okay, so the first thing you're going to do is you're going to ease your sleeve cap. So generally, the instructions have you ease between dot and dot, but I find it a lot easier to actually go from notch to notch. So I create my 2 rows of easing stitch from notch to notch. You're going to do that on both your sleeves. All right, once you have your easing stitches in your sleeve cap, you're going to go ahead and place your underarm seam right sides facing. Pin this in place. And then starting at the hem of the sleeve, you're going to stitch up using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Then you're going to go ahead and turn this right side out. We're going to create our casing for our elastic. Okay, so on your pattern piece, there was a fold line. What you're going to do is you're going to either serge and then press along that fold line and then stitch this in place. We're going to leave a little opening for our elastic. Or you can press up at the fold line and then turn in a 1/4 inch and stitch close to that edge, again also leaving an opening for the elastic. So I'm going to go ahead and just press up the fold line now that I've serged, and I'm going to stitch all the way around, leaving about a 1 inch opening so that we can insert our elastic. Okay, so I have my 2 pieces of elastic and a safety pin. I'm going to use my safety pin to put through my elastic, and then I'm going to use it to help me get my elastic all the way through the casing. I'm going to pin the other end to my fabric just so that I don't lose it inside the casing and then have to try and fish it out. Okay, once you've come out of the other side, you're going to go ahead and just pull on your elastic so you have a little room. Go ahead and overlap these by about a 1/4 of an inch and then just stitch them so that they're nice and secure. Okay, so my elastic is in. I'm going to go ahead and close my opening by putting my needle where my stitching ended, starting there and then stopping just past the existing stitching, back stitching both at the start and at the end. You're going to do your other casing the same way. All right, let's go ahead and ease our sleeve in. I'm going to go ahead and pull my easing stitches. You don't want to create a gathering at the top. You just want to remove some of this ease. Okay, so I'm going to start by pinning first at my side seam to the underarm seam. Your double notches should match up to the double notches on your sleeve. Go ahead and pin your single notch to your single notch. You should have had a dot for your shoulder. That's going to match up to your shoulder seam. If you need to ease a little bit more, now would be the time to do it. If when you're easing and pulling on your threads, you start to get puckers and you start to see more of a gathering look, then you've eased too much. I'm going to continue pinning until I have my whole sleeve pinned on. Okay, I want you to go ahead and ease and pin your other sleeve to the other side the same way. Okay, I'm actually going to start at my underarm seam and I'm going to work my way around, making sure that I'm not creating any pleats or tucks. And we're using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now go ahead and serge your seam allowance. You're going to sew your other sleeve the same way. All right, guys, so now all you have left to do is to hand stitch this by slip stitching it in place, your collar band. And then, of course, following the instructions for your specific machine, you will make your buttonholes On the front band pattern piece, you have markings that you will use to place your buttonhole markings. And once you're done slip stitching this, making your buttonholes and stitching on your buttons, you are all done. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed this sew along. Please make sure and tag us on social media if you post your pictures of this fantastic pattern, and make sure and tag at Mccall Pattern Company and also at Mimi G Style. Until next time, peace.